Hello everyone, X4 here, and welcome back to the channel for the JOJOLands Chapter 21 review, where we are finally out of the hospital and take a break from the action this chapter as we transition into the next arc, seeing movements from both Jodio's gang and Howler as they plan their next steps in this power struggle for the $50 billion, which actually introduces us to a handful of new enemy stand users, who appear to be acting as a trio, which could be something we've never seen before in JoJo, an arc with 3 minor villains all attacking at the same time, opposed to the occasional duo fights, which would be absolute chaos, but since we have such a large main cast in this part, Araki could definitely make it work. We also got some extras this month. First is the author note, which I usually don't mention as they're just short and random, but this one was pretty good, as Araki says he's currently obsessed with Sabrina Carpenter and that she's such an icon. Never change, Araki, you're so real for that, and honestly, why not? Let's get a Sabrina Carpenter stand in JoJo. I'd like to see more contemporary references anyways, as I'm pretty sure the most modern reference in part 9 is still like 30 years old, being November Rain, which came out in 1991. Everything else is like 80s or older. But back in early JoJolian, we were getting Rihanna, Lady Gaga references, so bring back the pop stars, Araki. Also, in celebration for the release of Volume 5 in JoJo Magazine, we got a special collaborative manga animation that fully embraces the Part 5 and 9 counterpart nature, and is just super well done, looks amazing, so shout out to Johan, the lead director and editor, for the new promo. And now, let's get into the breakdown. Starting with cover pages, we have Jodio and November Rain taking center stage on Ultra Jump in a nice colored illustration, while the inside cover is just a black and white version of the recently released Volume 5. And the chapter title is Howler Co. Impropriety Suspicions. And at the bottom of the page, there's also a little promo for the upcoming event JoJo Day, which will be related to the anime, and it's very promising to see that being hyped up in the magazine. And I've already got a full video out covering everything we know about the event so far that you can check out if you haven't already. So turning the page, we are welcomed into the chapter with a double page spread of Mac's executive office at the Dolphin Bank headquarters that overlooks Honolulu, which I immediately recognized solely based on my time spent in Yakuza Infinite Wealth. Like, this is the location in the game, it's right next to the beach. So this is the guy who first approached Howler about taking his land and then got caught up in the lava rock's flow, getting shot at the hospital and bringing the bank's documents to Jodio. So I've always just referred to him as the Dolphin Bank rep, but apparently they said his name back in chapter 17, which I totally missed. So this is Mac, full name Mac Yokohama, which we learn in this chapter as he becomes more relevant to the story. So what at first appears to be Mac before the events of the Glory Days incident, we soon discover, after a brief rock human scare, that this is actually Charming Man disguised as him infiltrating the bank's HQ, preparing to steal the money Howler needs to pay the bank. So their plan is essentially to intercept Howler's payment. And in order to pull this off smoothly, they'll need access to security and to make sure people aren't aware of Mac's disappearance. So we get to see Charmy talking to the guy's wife, saying he'll be on a business trip for about a week, and almost blows his cover when he doesn't know the magic words to tell his wife, which is apparently some kinky stuff. But either the translation or just what she's actually saying doesn't really make sense. Are her nether regions pointed the other way because Mac's not saying the magic words? Or is she saying the magic words since it's in quotes? But what does that even mean? What is a bitch cat? I don't know. But Charmy plays it cool and makes appearances for the family and some co-workers, while also changing the security passcode so they'll be able to use Mac's authority to steal the money when the time for the transfer comes. The chapter then transitions to the gang's headquarters at the Eco Boutique, where we continue to follow this high structure of touching base with Merill, and then she helps guide the mission, telling us what to do next. And seeing all of these characters in a room together, it's hard to believe that Merill isn't a stand user, especially since she's so enveloped in this world of crime, and how else does she think these kids are pulling off the heist? So just a mention of her stand at some point, or if she uses it to help out, that'd be cool. So back in the office, we see that Lulu was brought back with us, and she doesn't seem that adverse to being with the gang. She's mostly just depressed about Bobby, and because Usagi is taking out his frustration on her, threatening to grind her down to mush like they do on The Walking Dead. You're like 10 years too late on that reference, Araki, which is also kind of fair as she did try to kill him for a while there. So for the time being, their crew are keeping Lulu and Mac at the boutique in order to complete the job, with Lulu sticking with the crew while Mac is set up in the back being kept on life support that they somehow moved out of the hospital after it was raided by cops. Merill then interrogates Lulu for a bit and confirms that she's the only one who knows about their gang and that Howler asked her to retrieve the lava rock. So with that understanding, Merill then predicts how things will play out, saying right now Howler is frantically trying to figure out who we are, and that when cornering a rich person, they will quite easily use violence as currency, and that greed never ends with something pleasant and they'll always settle it with violence, pretty much saying that Howler will use any means necessary to take back this lava rock when threatening to steal his wealth away. So what's most important going forward is to lay low and have this transfer happen as soon as possible, with Merill creating a deadline of 7 days to complete the job. So the point of this deadline, I assume, is to just simply wait for the lava rock to do its thing, but if it's moving too slow or they don't notice any changes, they would need to find a way to speed up its process, because they can't hold Mac forever, and he's really the key to pulling off this transfer. And the sooner the transfer happens, the sooner Howler will be defeated. As Merill says, stripping a rich person of everything they've got will render their body and mind powerless. The chapter then switches scenes over to Howler, who despite being faced with this impending threat of losing his entire empire, continues his luxurious and carefree lifestyle and quickly validates pretty much everything Merill just said, and how his power only lies in his wealth, as when his car stops for just a moment, he demands to buy the road they're on and throws a tantrum like a spoiled kid. We then see that he was stopped by a riot outside of his building with the people of Hawaii calling for his head, so it looks like the big reason why the public hates Howler is because of his connections to the munitions industry, which was mentioned back in chapter 19 and was part of the family's rapid expansion in the 1960s, which looks like when a lot of Howler Co.'s corruption began with that influx of power, which was during Howler's grandfather's generation. So their land improprieties are mostly related to weapons manufacturing, either directly on his land or is supplying resources from his land to create weapons. Although Howler confidently dismisses all of the criticism, saying there's absolutely no evidence of anything illegal, it's all false rumors, it's fake news, and he didn't make any of the weapons. He then retreats into his building and talks to himself about how he doesn't understand all of this backlash he's getting and reflects a bit on his family history and name. So the name Aka is the Italian pronunciation for the letter H, and he was given this name because H is the 8th letter of the alphabet and he is the 8th generation of their family, which is a correction from chapter 19, which previously said that Aka was the 6th generation. But the reason Howler is explaining all of this is because from his perspective, their family are noble. They came from Italy, got permission from the royal family to start their farm, and have supplied water to Hawaii for generations. So how dare these people ask him to leave the place he was born, calling the protesters lowlifes, and flipping it on them, insinuating they're ungrateful for what he provides to them. Which gives more insight into his character, as he's not really aware of the negative impact his family has, or chooses to believe he's not culpable. And this could be seen as a sins of the father situation, where it was mostly Howler's grandfather that started the corruption and passed it down through the generations. So from Aka's very pampered perspective, this is all just normal for their family and is able to rationalize the corruption because it's so ingrained in his beliefs and tradition. So while Howler is talking to himself, he notices that he's been followed inside by 3 others, who make it clear that if Howler were to go bankrupt, that would be a problem for all of them. Howler doesn't know these people and questions if he even hired them, and they insist that he did. The trio all represent some form of civil authority. Key West is a lawyer, Lame Shebane is a police officer, and Ningbo is a firefighter, and these bizarre names are all in reference to port cities around the world: Key West in Florida, Lame Shebane in Thailand, and Ningbo in China. Also, not really associated with this trio, but Mac Yokohama's name is also in reference to the port city of Yokohama in Japan. So since these 3 all have a vested interest in Howler's position of power, the implication is that all of the institutions they represent are corrupt in some way, and rely on Howler's influence to maintain the status quo. This trio were also associated with Bobby Jean and had investigated his death, coming to the conclusion that the enemy are stand users, although they talk to Howler like they already know he's a stand user despite this being the first time meeting, and even Howler is suspicious of them. So my theory is that these 3 weren't actually hired by Howler, rather they heard the rumors of him going bankrupt, so they began their own investigation and are stepping in to help him, as a decentralization of power within Howler would impact all of the other state's institutions, like the justice system, police department, and firefighters, who in some way benefit from the corruption. It was also mentioned in chapter 19 that Howler has business and port rights, so considering their naming scheme, they may have connections to illegal imports or weapons that benefit their industries, which continues to build this theme in part 9 of man versus institution and criticisms of those with power over society, which could be seen as an evolution of the themes of man versus nature seen in part 8. So Howler goes along with them, as I'm sure he'll take any help he can get at this point, and instructs the trio to find and return Lulu, although refrains from telling them any further details about the enemy and the lava rock. And this scene introduces a whole new dynamic between the big bad and the minor villains, as in this scene, Howler is getting completely mocked by alongside the trio, as we see a glimpse of Lame Shibane's stand, which uses small worms that detect the scent of stress in living creatures, and creates a map on their glasses to reveal the location of those who are afraid. And they put pressure on Howler, revealing that he's the only one in the room right now that's scared. So they're not afraid of Akka, or even following his commands necessarily, but rather put themselves in this position to help only because the status quo his family has created is beneficial to them. And this puts Howler in a unique position where, unlike other main villains, assuming he is, Key West even calls him the final boss in this chapter, Akka doesn't have a personal motivation or a grand scheme, at least from what we've seen so far. He's more so stumbled into this position of power because of his family and continues their traditions. He's not an evil force that's super motivated and trying to achieve something. He's more like a stand-in for the concept of corruption itself and what it does to people, which I think could allow Araki to take a whole new approach on what we think of as a main villain. Like in this scene, Howler is the big final boss, but he doesn't have a horde of minor villains at his disposal, or even the respect from these minor villains. Rather, it's the order his family has created that's attracting evil from society to fight for him, which could lead to Akka becoming a more sympathetic and maybe mature villain as time goes on, as he's already getting a ton of screen time and maybe he starts to go against these family traditions. I always think those types of villains are the best. You gotta humanize them, give them a lot of screen time. It's always a good recipe. And that brings us to the final page of the chapter, where we see the trio, when investigating Bobby's death, had found his cell phone and search history for a one Paco Operantes, so I'm sure it won't be long before they close in on the game. So a trio of minor villains is pretty exciting, and something new for the series, as I assume this next arc will involve all of them, as they just fit together. They finish each other's sentences, they all share a naming scheme, and as we saw, one of them has a supportive type stand that will be used to locate the enemy, so I'm sure the other two will be more offensive type stands. And it looks like we did end up getting a lawyer character in the JOJOLands. Not so much of a Saul Goodman vibe, maybe she's more like a Kim Wexler, but I'm still here for it, and I got my fingers crossed for a courtroom drama arc. That would be incredible. So I really hope we get to see the entire gang fight together in this upcoming arc, even if we're split off into groups, and maybe even Lulu has to pick a side and helps us out. So if Araki commits to this idea, I'm really excited to see how he executes a larger stand battle. So that's about all my thoughts on chapter 21, but as always, let me know what you guys thought about this chapter down below in the comments, and we can continue the discussion until the next chapter. Any stand predictions, thoughts on the new characters, and all that. So thank you all so much for watching the video. Please drop a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you all real soon in a new video. Peace.